He never wrote back. Not to the letter, nor to the release form. Yet months later, I saw the frame upon his bookshelf. My final words, frozen beneath glass. That was all the answer I required. I once believed that silence meant peace. That was before I walked into that cafe on PRA Street and watched Jessica's face crack wide open. It was a rainy Thursday in New Orleans. Humid and gray, the kind of afternoon where time drags like a wet coat, where the city does not sparkle but sweats. I had been walking past the Red Cypress Cafe, not intending to enter, but through the fogged glass I saw her. Jessica, my ex-wife, laughing. She sat at a table near the back, framed by brick walls and Edison bulbs, surrounded by three people I did not recognize. Old college friends, perhaps, the sort she always insisted never truly mattered. But her laugh told another story. She tilted her head back the way she used to whenever I told her something absurd. Her hands moved with that casual grace I remembered all too well. One of the women reached across and touched her arm. Jessica smiled, leaned in, and whispered something that sent another wave of laughter through the whole table. I opened the door without thinking. The bell above it chimed, a sound I had heard 1,000 times before, but this time it sliced right through me. She turned, and just like that, all the color drained from her face. Jessica, my once everything, my then wrecking ball, the woman who took my trust and forged it into leverage, locked eyes with me and froze mid-sentence, her mouth still slightly open, her hand halfway to her coffee cup. You could almost hear the gears grinding behind her perfect composure. I did not flinch. I simply stood there, damp from the rain, hands in the pockets of my thrifted black jacket, watching her carefully as though she were a scene from a play I had already seen too many times. One of the men at the table. The man at the table was tall and polished, the sort who discusses stock options without prompting. He cast a glance in my direction, then turned back to her. Leaning in, he murmured something just beneath his breath. Jessica did not reply. Her posture had gone rigid. Her fingers now clutched the edge of the table as though it might slide out from under her at any moment. She had not seen me in nearly 5 years. Not since the day I walked out of our condo in Austin with nothing but a duffel bag. No note, no argument, simply gone. She hadn't chased me then, but now I watched panic climb her throat like heat rising behind her eyes. She stood up too quickly, jostling the table. A teaspoon clattered to the floor. Muttering something to the group, she brushed past the waiter and made a beeline for the door. I did not move. Not when she passed me. Not when her perfume washed over me. That same light citrus scent I'd once chosen for her at a boutique in Marfa. Not even when her fingers grazed the door handle with the urgency of someone fleeing a fire. I simply turned slowly and followed her out into the rain. Jessica was already halfway down the sidewalk when I caught up. Her heels clicked sharply against the wet pavement, but the rain softened everything. Her footsteps, the neon glow of the diner across the street, even the sharp line of her shoulders. She did not turn when I fell into step beside her, keeping her eyes forward as though speed alone could erase what was happening. Maybe none of this is real, Brian, she said finally, breath short, voice tight. You shouldn't be here. I didn't answer. Instead, I paused near a row of rusted bike racks beneath the overhang of an old storefront and waited. She stopped, too. She had to. The city always finds a way to trap you in small spaces when you least want to be caught. At first, she didn't face me. She just stood with her arms wrapped around herself, shivering slightly, though it wasn't that cold. Why now? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The rain had settled into a steady mist, and her hair clung to the curve of her cheek. She looked older than the last time I saw her, but only in ways that added weight, not age. A still beautiful woman, haunted by something she couldn't quite outrun. You still have it? I asked. She blinked. What? The necklace. I didn't have to say which one. She closed her eyes for a long second, as though the question alone hurt. Then she reached slowly into the lapel of her coat and drew something out on a thin silver chain. It was exactly as I remembered, a small onyx pendant set in rose gold, the one I'd given her that last Christmas, the one she'd worn the night I packed my bag and left. I didn't pawn it, she said softly, not quite meeting my eyes. If that's what you were wondering. I wasn't, I said, and it was true. We stood in silence after that, the kind you don't rush, the kind that stretches between two people who once knew each other's every detail and now feel like tourists in old ruins. I didn't know you were in town, she said finally. I wasn't planning to be. She looked down at the necklace again, her fingers brushing over it absently. It was just supposed to be a dinner. They were passing through and wanted to catch up. I wasn't thinking about me. I offered. Her eyes darted to mine, and for a second I saw something shift in them. Regret, maybe, or guilt, or the exact blend of both that used to make me crumble. No, she said, not like that. I nodded once slow. I don't want to ruin your night, I added, stepping back. Just wanted to know if you still had it. That's all. She let out a shaky breath. I should get back in there. Sure. She turned to go, then paused. Brian. I looked up. I didn't think you'd ever speak to me again. I'm not, I said. Not really. And I walked away, but not quickly. I wanted her to feel the weight of that last sentence hang in the rain behind me. I didn't look back. Not when. The rain began to fall more heavily. Not long after, a cab pulled up a few feet ahead, and I slid into the back seat without a word. The driver asked for an address, and I gave him the name of a motel I hadn't booked yet, just the first one that came to mind. It wasn't until we turned the corner that I allowed myself one glance in the mirror. Jessica was still outside the cafe. She hadn't gone back in. She stood beneath the awning, one hand pressed flat against the glass as though she needed to steady herself. I couldn't see her face clearly, too much fog on the windows, but the shape of her shoulders told me everything I needed to know. She remembered, and now, finally, she was starting to feel it. I'd spent years convincing myself that maybe she didn't, that perhaps I was the only one dragging that weight around like an iron lung. But I saw it just then. She wasn't laughing anymore. I didn't sleep much that night. The motel was exactly what you'd expect. Dim light, scratchy sheets, the air conditioner rattling like it had asthma. I lay there staring at the water stain on the ceiling, wondering what had to shift in a person's heart to make betrayal look like ambition. I remembered the necklace in her hand. It wasn't the value of it that mattered. It never had been. It was what it meant, that I saw her, that I gave her something when I still believed in forever. And she'd kept it, even now, after all of it. The next day, I didn't call her, didn't text. I went about my business in New Orleans. Some client meetings, a walk through the Garden District, a sandwich in silence at Cosan Butcher. But something kept tugging at me. I imagined her phone screen that night. I pictured her alone, thumbing through old photos like she always did when the house was too quiet. The way she'd squint at the screen, as though getting closer might bring the moment back. There'd be one picture I knew she hadn't deleted. New Year's Eve. She wore a red velvet dress that night, laughing as though no cruelty had ever brushed against her. My arm was wrapped around her, and I grinned like a fool. It was then that I first promised I would take care of her, no matter what. And I kept that promise, until she decided, no matter what, was not a vow she shared. Still, I imagine that photograph gave her pause. I suspect it settled in her chest like a weight she never expected to carry. For if regret understands one thing, it is how to arrive too late and make itself at home. She always claimed it was never about the money. That was before I discovered the folder tucked into the back of my desk drawer. Before the night, I saw that photograph of us on New Year's Eve and finally understood what lay behind her smile. It was 6 years ago, back when I still believed that doing right by someone meant they would return the favor. Jessica had been spending more time in Austin then. She said she was helping an old friend, Jordan, one of those polished entrepreneurs with excessive charm and little substance. He ran a startup in supply chain tech or real estate automation, or one of those industries where no one quite knows what the company does, yet they still raised $10 million in series of funding. I should have recognized it sooner. Jessica had always been magnetic in rooms full of people trying to sell something. What I did not know was that Jordan was sleeping with her. And more than that, he was using her to get to me. My company was growing quickly at the time. I had built something real from nothing, something honest. And she knew exactly who trusted me. The CEO from Nashville, the logistics specialist from Salt Lake, my partner from Denver who once told me over drinks that he would invest in anyone I vouched for. They all received emails from Jessica, not from me. Emails in which she personally endorsed Jordan's platform, assuring them it had Brian's full confidence, using my name like a ladder, climbing rung by rung. She climbed, rung by rung, toward her own future. The money she received in return was not a gift. It was a commission, quiet, untraceable, deposited into an account to which I never had access. She told herself it was not betrayal. She told herself it was merely helping someone win. But here is what makes it worse than cheating. I would have given her everything anyway, if only she had asked. I discovered the truth in fragments. First through an investor who called me directly, confused as to why I had not followed up after my recommendation. Then through an email forwarded by mistake. Then the receipt, the NDA with Jordan's firm, her digital signature, my name written all over it. And I did not confront her. I wish I could say I did. I wish I could say I stormed into the kitchen, slammed the paper down on the counter, and demanded to know what in the hell she thought she was doing. But I did not. Instead, I watched her come home that night as though nothing had changed. I watched her take off her coat, kick off her heels, pour herself a glass of wine with that same little sigh she always made when the day was done. I remember sitting on the couch, laptop open, pretending to be absorbed in spreadsheets while the world I had built quietly burned behind my eyes. I did not scream. I did not accuse. I simply watched her. And the next morning, I left. No fight. No note. Just a suitcase and silence. Because that is how you know you are truly finished. When the heartbreak does not explode, it disappears. I never told anyone where I went. Not my friends, not my parents, not the man at the front desk who watched me check into a furnished studio in Houston with nothing but a duffel bag and 2 shirts that still smelled like her closet. Jessica did not reach out, not for days. And when she finally did, 3 texts, all soft panic wrapped in forced calm. I did not answer. I knew better than to play the game where the one who wounds you asks you to bleed quietly. For a time, I drifted, taking freelance work. I took on consulting gigs, mostly remote. I changed my number, grew a beard, bought a secondhand road bike, and rode until my legs burned. The silence of it all felt cleaner than any apology could have been. But Jessica, she didn't stop moving. She rose. Her name began appearing in newsletters I once subscribed to, before I could no longer stand reading about people like her. A boutique logistics investment firm, a speaking panel at South by Southwest. Someone posted a photo of her smiling at a rooftop event in Los Angeles. Same style, same necklace. I stared at that image longer than I care to admit. She looked content. That was the hardest part. It wasn't that she hadn't hurt me. It was that she had benefited from it. One evening, perhaps a year after I left, she appeared in a trade article, Female Innovators to Watch. And I remember sitting there in a quiet diner booth, pushing cold eggs around my plate, feeling something old and sharp uncoil in my chest. I think that's when I realized it wasn't over. Because betrayal doesn't end when the door closes. It echoes. It stains. It builds. I wasn't the only one still living in the shadow of what she had done. She might have looked golden on the outside, but the numbers told a different story. Jessica's new firm hadn't grown on its own. It leaned heavily, suspiciously, on connections she never earned. My clients, my partners, my credibility, scrubbed clean and repackaged as her own. And eventually, it caught up. I wasn't there when it happened, but I heard from someone we both knew back then, Hal McPherson, an old investor who never did learn to keep his phone calls short. He told me she'd been asking questions, looking into tax exposure, asset migration. Apparently, she'd been speaking with a financial advisor, trying to rebalance, whatever that meant. But the kicker was this. Most of what she had traced back to me. Not directly, not in a way that would make headlines, but under the skin. Of every dollar, every endorsement, every organic growth initiative, I was the quiet, invisible, necessary part. And perhaps, just perhaps, she was beginning to feel it. The weight of everything she had built upon a foundation she had stolen. It arrived on a Wednesday. I was seated in a quiet cafe near the Montreux district, a small place, black coffee, a wall of plants. The kind of space where no one knows your name, and you are glad they do not. The email appeared in my inbox as though it had every right to be there. Subject, no expectations, just that. No greeting, no signature. I did not open it immediately. Instead, I stared at the notification for a while, watching it hover like a ghost. I recognized the tone before I even read the words. I could hear her voice in the way she titled it. Cool, distant, disarmed. Eventually, I tapped it open. Brian, I'm not asking for anything. You don't owe me a reply, but you should know that I'm sorry. I wasn't brave back then. I told myself I was being strategic, smart, that it wasn't really betrayal if I didn't mean to hurt you. But I knew what I was doing. You trusted me, and I used that trust to climb higher. I've told myself for years that if I saw you again, I'd say all this in person. But when I did, I couldn't breathe. So here it is. Cold, tight, late, but real. I hope you're better than I left you. Jessica, that was all. No dramatic flourish, no excuses, no softening language. Just the facts laid bare like bones on dry land. I did not reply, not out of anger, but because I no longer needed to. You learn something after being betrayed that deeply. The absence of a reaction is its own response. I closed the email. I did not delete it nor flag it. I simply let it sit in the inbox like an artifact from a world that no longer held power over me. That night, I went home, turned off my phone, and took a long walk past the closed-up shops and sleeping houses. The kind of walk where the silence finally speaks. It feels earned, a place where your hands no longer shake. Somewhere out there, Jessica was staring at a screen, waiting for nothing. And that, for once, was precisely what she received. Months passed. The email remained untouched in my inbox. I did not reread it. I did not delete it, either. It simply sat there, cold, perfectly worded, and late, like the kind of letter someone sends only after realizing the world is no longer listening. And I did not reply, because sometimes silence is the only thing that speaks clearly. I moved on slowly, quietly. Routines rebuilt themselves without effort. The apartment I once rented in Houston became a real home. Neutral walls, good coffee, peace. My work grew steadier. I even began sleeping again, no longer dreaming of the sound of a slammed door or the weight of a lie sliding into bed beside me. Then one morning, while scrolling through old contacts on LinkedIn, trying to recall the name of a man I'd worked with in Nashville, I saw her, not directly, but through someone else's photograph. It was from a community shelter fundraiser in East Austin. Jessica stood in the background, her hair tied back. No heels, no polished blazer, no pretense. She wore a plain white t-shirt and jeans, holding a clipboard as though she didn't mind being overlooked. It took me a moment to believe it. The Jessica I knew would not have walked across that parking lot without checking her reflection. She would not have smiled unless it served some purpose. Yet there she was, half smiling, tired, unnoticed, like someone stripped down to the bone. At first, I thought it might be a one-time gesture, a photo taken to be seen doing good. But 2 weeks later, I saw her again, tagged in a post by someone else. Then once more in the shelter's monthly email blast. Week after week, she was there, sorting food boxes, coordinating pickups, speaking with women who probably saw right through the softness in her voice because they had known it in themselves. I had heard false kindness before. Still, she kept showing up. There was no applause, no articles, no one writing think pieces about her. It was reinvention, but just Jessica, quiet, low to the ground. I couldn't explain the way it hit me. It wasn't quite satisfaction, nor was it pity. It was something sharper, more tangled. There was a strange comfort in watching her disappear from the life she once fought so hard to climb into. It was as if the universe was gently returning her to the beginning, not as punishment, but as proof. Because without my name, without the doors I once opened for her, she didn't rise. And that truth, heavy and slow, had finally caught up with her. I heard she sold her condo. Something about downsizing. A friend of a friend mentioned she'd been trying to restructure her accounts, that most of her investments were drying up, and that she'd been quietly taken off a few advisory boards. She wasn't blacklisted, she was just forgotten. And in the absence of attention, Jessica finally began to work. Not for applause, not for leverage, but for something else. Maybe guilt, maybe peace, maybe just the simple human need to feel clean again. I didn't interfere. Even when her name landed in a local article buried deep in the community section, talking about volunteer intake logistics, I didn't comment. I didn't click. I didn't send it to anyone. This wasn't my story anymore. Whatever shame she was carrying, it was hers now. Whatever version of herself she was trying to become, she'd have to do it alone, without me as her moral shadow. No reaction, no validation. No, I told you so. Just the quiet consequence of having burned someone who had loved her without a safety net. Sometimes the real punishment isn't losing someone. It's realizing they survived without you. It came in the form of a letter, certified, sealed, and legal. I wasn't the one who sent it. My lawyer did. That's the kind of thing I pay him for now. Clean lines. No mess. Nothing left open for interpretation. Jessica received the interpretation on a Tuesday. I know this because that evening, at precisely 7:14 p.m., she called me. I let the phone ring until it went to voicemail. She left no message, only silence on the line. Perhaps she had hoped to hear my voice before hanging up. Or perhaps she was trying to gather the courage to say something before it was too late. But she knew what the envelope contained. The title of the book was The Cost of Silence, my memoir. And in Chapter 4, there was no pseudonym. There was no shielding. There was simply her name, first and last, printed in black ink on cream-colored paper, just as it had appeared in the business contracts, in the email threads, in the brokerage filings. It was time the story matched the record. I had worked on the book in pieces over the last year, not to seek revenge, nor to humiliate, but simply to write down the truth while it remained sharp in my mind. It wasn't even about her, not entirely. It was about the pattern, about what happens when good men stay quiet for too long, about how dignity, when mistaken for weakness, invites wolves to the table. But Jessica, she was a chapter, a long one. And apparently, that was enough to rattle her. By Thursday, I received the email from her lawyer, civil but frantic. It was a formal request to remove her name, citing reputational damage, emotional distress, and the vague threat of legal action if I did not comply. My lawyer called it what it was, noise. She's bluffing, he said. You have documentation, timelines, bank trails. You didn't accuse her of anything untrue. She's just scared people will finally connect the dots. Good, I said, because this wasn't about punishing her. It was about reclaiming my own damn voice. For years, I had kept my mouth shut while she built a reputation atop the ruins she left behind. I watched people congratulate her, fund her, celebrate her vision, never knowing that the bedrock she stood on had someone else's name chiseled beneath it. Mine. So no, I was not excising her from the narrative out of cruelty, but in the service of accuracy. That Saturday, we met within a lawyer's office, a neutral territory of glass and brushed concrete in downtown Austin. She arrived 10 minutes late, dressed simply, without makeup, her hair tied back. Her face appeared thinner than I remembered, as though sleep had been elusive. She seated herself across from me, clasped her hands upon the table, and drew a long, steadying breath. Brian, please. They were the first words she had spoken to me in person since that day outside the cafe. I offered no reply. She tried once more. Do you have to use my name? I allowed the silence to linger, feeling her composure fray with each passing moment. You said your piece in that email. I finally said. This is mine. You could just tell it without dragging me through it. I didn't drag you, I replied calmly. You walked in all on your own. Her voice wavered slightly. But I'm trying to be better. Doesn't that matter? I leaned forward, meeting her gaze. No anger, no heat, only truth. I stayed quiet when it mattered. Now I won't. With that, I stood, nodded to my lawyer, and left her seated at the table, her hands still clasped, knuckles pale and trembling. I did not look back, because for once, I was not the one who required permission to move forward. I never expected her to read it. Not all of it. People like Jessica are adept at skipping pages, at pretending certain chapters do not apply to them. Yet a few weeks after our meeting, after I had walked out of that glass enclosure and left her amid a polished silence, I learned she had purchased the book in hardcover from a small downtown shop, not a chain store. The detail struck me as oddly specific. Perhaps she believed it would feel more personal. Perhaps she did not wish for a receipt tied to her name. Regardless, it found its way into her hands. And from what I was told, again, secondhand, whispered by someone who knew, she read every word. Still orbiting the dim periphery of her fading world, she read it in a single sitting, alone at her kitchen table. I picture it often, the light above the stove casting a weak yellow circle across the worn granite countertop, a half-finished mug of tea growing cold, the rest of the house silent except for the occasional creak of floorboards shifting with the night air. She would have begun slowly, cautiously, braced for exaggeration, ready to dismiss it as bitterness in a clever voice. But the truth does not care how ready you are. And mine was laid out with surgical precision. Chapter 4 did not spit venom. It did not call her names. It did not speculate or lash out. It simply told the story as it happened. Clean, factual, devastating in its restraint. The way she laughed at Jordan's joke while forwarding my contact list. The way she signed a contract before I came home that night. The quiet meals afterward where she kissed my cheek and poured wine as though she were not building a second life just out of reach. She read it all, every line, every detail she had assumed went unnoticed. And she could deny none of it, because I had written it like a ledger, not a wound. That is what gutted her. Not the anger, but the absence of it. The steady way I documented betrayal without ever once begging for sympathy. The way I made it clear I had survived without her. I imagined she closed the book slowly. Perhaps she set her hand on the cover for a while, letting the weight of it settle. Maybe she whispered something, her own name, or mine, or nothing at all. The truth is, I did not need her to hurt. That was never the point. But I needed her to see it, to read the facts without flinching, to understand that just because someone walks away without a fight does not mean they walked away untouched. That night, she did not call. She did not text. She did not send another carefully worded apology. She did not have to. She finally knew what I carried. She finally knew what it cost. It arrived by post. No signature was required. No courier delivered it. Just a plain manila envelope left upon my doorstep one overcast Tuesday morning, tucked neatly beneath the welcome mat like a message no one wished to be seen delivering. There was no return address, but by then I knew. I always knew when something came from her. The envelope was light, thin, holding a single sheet of heavy white paper fastened to a printed form. The form was legal, a standard release, typed and dated. A full grant of rights for the use of a name, signed in pen. Jessica Renee Whitaker. No conditions, no redactions, no revisions. Only her name, surrendering itself to the truth. And beneath the legal document, folded in thirds like something sacred and private, lay a handwritten note on blank stationery. Her script looked exactly as it had the day she scribbled our grocery lists on the backs of envelopes. Only now it trembled, just slightly. Brian, I won't ask you to reply. I don't need you to. I read it. All of it. And for the first time, I didn't reach for an excuse. You finally grew strong. I hope you never shrink again. J, that was all. No grand explanation, no defensive footnote, no invitation to coffee or quiet reconciliation. Only this. And she hadn't folded the letter like someone trying to convince me of something. She folded it like someone letting go. I stood there for a long while, still barefoot, the envelope in one hand, the letter in the other. The morning air was cold for Austin. Biting in that way early spring sometimes delivers as a warning. I could hear children laughing down the block, a dog barking behind a fence, the hum of a garbage truck rolling past the curb. Life moved on, and so did I. But I did not throw it away, nor did I hide it. I went back inside, cleared a space on the bookshelf in my office, and slid the letter into a simple black frame. Not out of sentiment, but out of respect for what it must have taken to write it. I did not write. I never had to turn my back. Some stories do not end with closure, but with understanding. And that is what this was. Not a return, not a reunion, not even forgiveness. Merely the moment when two people, no longer bound by pain or promise, finally placed the truth where it belonged, on the record, and then let it be. I walk past it every morning. The frame rests near the edge of the bookshelf, between an old photograph of my father and the first edition of The Cost of Silence. Not centered, not displayed, simply there. Visible, quiet, unremarkable to anyone but me. Most visitors never even notice it. They might ask about the vintage record player in the corner, or the map on the wall marked with push pins, but the framed letter, no one ever points to it. And I do not bring it up, because that letter is not for them. It is not even for her anymore. It is for the version of me who once disappeared quietly. The man who left without slamming the door, who walked away with his pride buried under layers of shock and disbelief, convincing himself that silence was his only weapon. I was wrong. Silence did not protect me. It prolonged the decay. Telling the truth, that is what saved me. When I first began writing the book, I believed it was about clearing my name, about holding someone accountable. But what I did not realize, until I held that first printed copy in my hands, was that the name I needed to clear was not hers. It was mine. I spent years ashamed, not only of what she did, but of how little I did in return. I allowed betrayal to rewrite me. I let the world believe I was merely the man who vanished, too weak to fight, too stunned to stand. But I fought back in the only way I could, with facts, with patience, with memory. And when the book finally went out into the world, I felt neither rage nor pride. I felt still. Afterward, people asked me if I forgave her. I did not. That is not the point. Forgiveness implies a debt is owed. Something must be settled. Yet some debts are too ancient, too entangled, to ever be resolved. What I gave to her, she cannot return. What she took was not money. It was not reputation. It was belief. And belief, once shattered, does not rebuild. It is replaced. Now I believe in myself, in my own voice, in the value of speaking up, even when your hands still tremble as you do it. Jessica and I have not spoken since the letter. I believe that is how it should remain. She did what she felt she had to do. So did I. There is a strange peace in knowing a story has finally finished telling itself. Sometimes I sit on the porch at dusk and think of how close I came to never writing a single word. How effortless it would have been to leave everything buried. To nod politely when asked, "Hey, whatever happened between you and Jessica?" And to offer a lie in reply, "We just grew apart." But the truth is, we did not grow apart. She climbed over me, and I allowed it, until I did not. If you are watching this, perhaps you have been there. Perhaps you are still there, sitting with questions that have no answers. Swallowing betrayal because you do not wish to be seen as the dramatic one. I understand. But here is what I learned. When someone cashes in on your kindness, when they wear your trust like a costume, they expect you to vanish quietly. Do not. You need not scream. You need not burn bridges. But you do have to speak. Even if your voice is but a whisper on the page, because the moment you name what was taken, you begin to take yourself back. Every morning, I walk past that letter. I do not smile. I do not ache. I simply nod and continue walking forward. If this story has landed somewhere deep within you, leave a comment. Share what you have walked away from or what you still carry. And if you have ever felt your silence was the only thing you had left, perhaps it is time to use it differently. Thank you for listening.